This is the Rational Reminder Podcast, a weekly reality check on sensible investing and financial decision-making from two Canadians. We're hosted by me, Benjamin Felix, and Cameron Passmore, portfolio managers at PWL Capital.
Welcome to episode 288. And this one, Ben, as I just said to you before we started recording, we can make this the shortest intro ever. And it could simply be, you got to listen to it and you have to share it with anybody who's in a relationship. This is absolute gold, in my opinion. We welcomed Scott Rick, who is the author of the just released book, Tightwads and Spendthrifts, Navigating the Money Minefield in Real Relationships. And pardon me, Scott is incredible. His research is incredible, and it applies to all of us, I would argue.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a really important topic. How do you navigate money in a relationship, and how important should your financial tendencies be in selecting a partner? There's a lot of, I guess, common wisdom around that. And I think Scott adds a lot of evidence and nuance to what people may have heard on things like, should you choose a partner for money or for their financial habits or for love, which we talk about at the end of the episode. But Scott's book and this conversation are meticulously evidence-based takes on navigating money in a relationship, and including with kids. We cover gift giving as well, which I thought his insights on were incredible. Like you said, it's a very, very valuable episode with the right combination of evidence and practical tools based on that evidence for actions that people can actually be taking in their relationships.
Well, the question we get so often for years, the joint bank account question, how should we manage our day-to-day banking? He has evidence behind this. How should you behave in front of your kids? And that links back to our conversation late last year with James Grubman. So fascinating.
Yeah, it's a great episode. Big fan of the book and Scott's approach, and I think he delivered the same in this conversation.
So here's a bit of his bio. Scott's a marketing professor at the University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. He holds a PhD in behavioral decision research from Carnegie Mellon University, and then he spent 2 years as a postdoctoral fellow at Wharton. Also want to give a shout out to our very good friend Hal Hirschfield for making the introduction to Scott. So we're super grateful to Hal, and again, Scott's just terrific. It was a really, really great. We got through lots of questions, lots of content, and very, very pragmatic science, evidence-based advice.
Yep.
Ben,
that's
anything
good.
to add?
Nope. That's a good introduction. Let's go ahead to our episode with Scott Rick.
Scott Rick, welcome to the Rational Reminder Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Happy New Year and congratulations on your phenomenal book.
I really appreciate it. Happy New Year.
Thank you. So off the top, in general, how would you describe the relationship that people have with money?
It's very fraught. It's it's a necessary relationship, so you can't get around it. So it's worth investigating and reflecting on. It's very anxiety provoking for a lot of us. For some of us, that happens more before we make decisions with money, and some of us it's kind of after, and we're reflecting on the decisions we have made, and maybe we might wish we had some of that anxiety before we made the decision to kind of put the brakes on some overspending, perhaps. But yes, it's hard to find a ton of people who are kind of super comfortable around this topic.
How important is the topic of money to the quality of romantic relationships?
I mean, it's right up there in terms of where a marriage can go wrong. It's kind of right around arguments over in-laws in terms of like the most draining, jarring aspect of a relationship. And it's just a leading cause of divorce, and it's not surprising. It's just, again, it's one of these unavoidable things. There are quirks that you might encounter when dating someone that you can brush off, and the stakes are low. But once you get into a relationship, my goodness, you are just overwhelmed with all these kind of important money related decisions, and it's so easy to get some wrong, or at least wrong in your partner's eyes, and there's just so many opportunities for friction there.
Hmm. Okay, so let's dive into the book and cover off two of the terms in the title. What do the terms tightwad and spendthrift mean?
Yes, these are kind of old-timey terms with non-obvious definitions. So a tightwad, to me, is someone who they want to spend money. There are things that they want to buy, but they just can't bring themselves to buy those things that they think they should be buying. They feel anxious when thinking about a lot of optional purchases, and that anxiety or distress uh, prevents them from buying things they think they should. And so they suffer as a result. The people around them suffer as a result. And so that's very different from a spendthrift. A spendthrift is someone who they don't experience enough anxiety or distress when thinking about spending money. They end up buying things that they don't really need right now. They might need it one day. So they're shopping for a lot of potential needs, but they come to regret a lot of those purchases. So tightwads and spendthrifts, they're both conflicted in a sense. They look very different on paper. A tightwad looks good financially, usually, but they both have a very conflicted relationship with how they use money.
Hmm. How can someone, or also how do you in the research assess where someone falls on that tightwad spendthrift scale?
Yeah, so so we developed a little 4-question measure. It's in the book, and I'm happy to share a link to it. It kind of asks people to reflect on different approaches to shopping and kind of which approach historically resembles what they do. In general, for example, are you like the shopper who sees items they know they need, they're on sale, but you can't bring yourself to spend the money? That's the tightwad. Or are you more like someone who sees a sale, you know you don't really need anything, but you can't resist,
Hmm.
and you end up spending a bunch of money? That's the spendthrift. So where on this continuum do you fall? And responses to this scale are pretty stable over time. We've revisited participants over the years, and it's pretty stable where you fall in this dimension.
How do demographic characteristics affect the likelihood of being either a tightwad or a spendthrift?
So tightwads tend to be a little older. We don't know if that's an effect of aging or if it's a generational thing. We would need to follow people for much longer periods of time, but it's there. It's a small correlation. Spendthrifts are a little more likely than tightwads to be women. It's small. It depends on when you ask the question. It's kind of a sensitive relationship, but it tends to be there. Tightwads tend to be more mathematical. They major in more mathematical majors in college.
Hmm.
So there is that component. I think that, for better or worse, kind of helps them think about opportunity cost and what I'm giving up later by spending now, which can be good or bad depending on how much you ruminate on that. But yeah, there are these small demographic correlates, but nothing like gigantic.
Hmm.
You couldn't tell just by looking at someone, oh, that's obviously a tightwad or a spendthrift.
Hmm. What about and I'm asking this because someone commented it on one of our YouTube videos a while ago. Are there any, and I guess the part of that, the answer to that question just now, are there gender differences in tightwad spendthrift?
Yeah. The spendthrifts tend to be they're more likely to be female than
Hmm.
the tightwads. But again, it's a small relationship. It depends on when you ask the questions and how you order the questions in the survey, but
Mm.
it tends to be there. We do tend to find it. So but again, it's not huge, and there are plenty of women who are tightwads.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. I saw that comment. My knee-jerk reaction was, that seems like a bias, but maybe not.
Yeah, no, there's it's I think it's a smaller relationship than a lot of people do
All
expect.
right. Okay.
Mm.
How is being a tightwad different from being frugal?
So they look very similar on paper in terms of if you just looked at their bank accounts or their credit score. But a frugal person, the psychology is very different. The frugal people enjoy to save and they enjoy saving. They believe in it. They think it's the right thing to do. It's not a struggle for them. They believe in kind of reusing household items and like, oh, I can find a different use for that baggie, or let me do something different with this hanger to hang something else up that's not closed. They really kind of like to wear things out. They're not buying replacements so easily. And it's just a value for them. It's a belief that this is the right thing to do and they're happy with it. A tightwad, I mean a true tightwad is someone who they have money to spend. They recognize that they would be happier, or at least the people around them would be happier if they bought this thing, but they just can't get there. They just
Mm.
can't do it. And it's a frustrating experience and it does harm them, really.
Hmm.
Absolutely fascinating. How does objective financial status affect where people fall on that scale?
In terms of current objective financial status, if you're looking at income, that was something we were very interested in at the start. Like, oh, is someone a tightwad because they can't afford to spend? It does not seem to be the case. Income is not a predictor of whether you're a tightwad or a spendthrift. Certainly, tightwads look better in terms of savings and debt than spendthrifts, but it's not about income. Now, it might be about past income.
Hmm.
It might be about a lot of tightwads seem to have had a period earlier in life where money was tight, or at least they felt money was tight, and they developed kind of a protective shell, kind of a gut response of making spending painful to protect them from going broke. And then for a lot of tightwads, their circumstances improve, and you just can't change these kind of well-learned responses over time. I quote a character from Love in the Time of Cholera. It was this man who grew up poor and then over time became this rich industrialist. And someone called him rich. And he said, no, 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 I'm not rich. I am a poor man with money. That is very different. So the mindset, the reactions were developed early and they can be very hard to shake when your circumstances change.
That's really interesting. We did an episode recently with Dr. James Grubman, who's got research on, he calls it like cultural migration from not wealthy to wealthy, and how a lot of this stuff can affect your ability to act wealthy even if you are.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Now, I there's another writer I quote. He had a New York Times column recently. He talked about post brokenness stress disorder, and again, looks fine on paper, everything's good, but he hears a beeping outside. He's like, I remember when I was young, cars getting repossessed, and I just
Wow.
immediately think, I got to go check the window. Like, is someone taking my car? It's hard to shake that stuff.
Who is that writer?
I believe his name is Damon Young. Um, yeah, it was a
Interesting.
few years ago in the Times.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. I think I know exactly who you're talking about.
Yeah.
How does where people fall on this scale, on the tightwad spendthrift scale, how does it relate to their happiness and their regret?
Yeah, so in the scale, I probably should have mentioned by now, we tend to break it up into three types of people. So you have the tightwads, the spendthrifts, and then in the middle, we have what we call the unconflicted consumers, kind of the Goldilocks zone. They have some distress when thinking about spending money, but not too little, not too much, and they're kind of more or less at peace with how much they're spending. And when you ask different measures of happiness or overall well-being, it's the unconflicted consumers who tend to be happiest.
Hmm.
And again, they look worse on paper than tightwads. They're spending more than tightwads. So it's not just about the numbers. It's about kind of using the money you have in the right way. And so um, yes, the people in the middle, the unconflicted consumers tend to be happiest, and the people at the extremes, the tightwads and spendthrifts, they tend to be saddled with the most kind of regret and second guessing and what ifs.
Hmm.
Can you talk about the underlying psychological mechanisms behind spendthrift and tightwad behaviors? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. So I think for tightwads, there is part of it is reactions that were once helpful that are no longer helpful, that you develop early in life and you can't shake. Part of it is an obsession with opportunity cost, what I'm giving up later by spending today. And again, tightwads are more mathematical and they are very willing to look at a price tag and think of it in terms of what I'm giving up later.
Mm.
Spendthrifts are fascinating. It's a little self-serving. I'm a spendthrift, but I love my spendthrifts. But so again, we're not just shopping for things we need, but we're shopping for potential needs. And I'm going to quote another podcast here. It's called Ask Rana. It's like a advice podcast. But the character Rana, she says, I'd rather be looking at it than looking for it. And that is really the spendthrift mentality. So I might go to the store to buy work clothes. And while I'm there, I see like, oh, a lovely velvet jacket. I might think, oh, that would be so fun to wear to like a fancy holiday party or, some other event like that. Now, that event is not at all on the calendar. And I am not the type of person to be invited to such events. But my goodness, what if I were? I would love to have that jacket. So I'll go ahead and pick up the jacket and I'll see it in the closet and I'll think, oh, that'll be fun someday. And so there are all these maybe, what if potential needs we're shopping for. We're a very hopeful bunch, I would say.
That's so so interesting. I see so much of the opposite in myself. I won't buy clothes until the absolute last minute when I need them.
Yes. Yes, we see all kinds of stories like that. As a spendthrift, it just bends my mind. Like I have the money and I'm miserable every time I put on these shoes, but I'm going to wait till they go on sale. Like, buy the shoes. You're hurting. Why? Um, so yes, there are vast differences.
It's so interesting. I had lunch with a good friend a few weeks ago before Christmas, and he talked about how he will often do a net present value on things he spends. Well, this will cost X, but over time that'll compound to X to whatever. Or he'll do a discount the other way on a large purchase. Well, that could be this amount of cash for life instead of buying a car or something large, and he can't help it.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, that kind of informed mathematical approach.
Yes.
Yes.
This day definitely occurs. I waited. I needed basketball shoes, and I just kept putting it off. And then I finally had to go and buy new ones because both my big toenails turned completely black. And I was like, okay, it's probably time. I probably should have done it sooner.
Well, you have to protect your basketball reputation. Paramount.
What can tightwads do to loosen up their spending behavior?
Yeah. So, there's a few things. One approach that I like is kind of reserving space for indulgence. So we often think of budgeting as a way to restrict spending, but budgeting can be a way to loosen up also. So a tightwad needs a budget, or you can call it like a spending plan. But left to their own devices in the moment, if they encounter something that they're thinking about indulging on, they might say, well, I can't afford it. But if they're able to kind of pre-commit to some amount of fun or indulgence and set a plan for it, I have X dollars this month to spend on fun things. When they encounter the fun thing 3 weeks later, the money's there, and that can loosen them up to go for it. But they're not going to find the money in the moment. In the moment, they're just going to be like, I can't afford this. So it takes some planning, which tightwads can be good at, but you have to be kind of forward looking and pre-plan for it. I think high-end purchases, tightwads are sometimes a little penny wise, pound foolish, going for kind of cheap things that fall apart. And it's good to kind of find ways to look at expensive items as an investment if they're well made. And some brands are trying to tell us like, yes, you should buy fewer things. Like we make good stuff that lasts longer. And it's true. Like usually when a brand says that, the evidence backs them up. Brands are misleading about a lot of things, but those claims are usually pretty good. So I say give the brands credit there. Pay attention to those promises.
Hmm.
I think the planning advice is good. How important is it for people to actually have an understanding of their overall financial position to actually being comfortable spending? Like, do a lot of people just don't know what their situation and what they could afford to spend?
I think a lot of people have a good feeling about what their situation is, but it's an imperfect feeling and it can help to kind of get an outside perspective on how you're doing, where you stand. It really can relax someone when like a professional looks over their paperwork and says, "Oh, you're doing pretty good here." That can be very reassuring to some people. Now, of course, it depends. It's just like medicine, like what's the bedside manner? The message can be delivered a thousand different ways, and
Mm-hmm.
there are things that can kind of throw you off. But in general, I do think it's good to get outside perspectives and not just leave it to yourself to figure out how am I doing. Um, it's good to get a sense of how other people think you're doing.
Hmm. What role do you think financial advisors who are maybe looking at the bigger, longer term picture should play in helping people figure out how much they should be spending?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that they can play a very important role. The hard part is getting people to get in there in the first place.
Hmm.
A spendthrift, they'll spend more on velvet jackets, but they also might be willing to spend more on financial advice.
Hmm.
Um, it's the tightwad who you might have a hard time getting them to get in there in the first place and be willing to hear this advice. Luckily, a lot of tightwads are married to spendthrifts, and the spendthrift spouse can kind of, escort them in. But um, no, I think financial advisors can play a big role here, especially helping tightwads.
What about, and I just thought of this, what about mediating the differences in spending between a tightwad and a spendthrift spouse? Can a financial advisor play that role?
Sure. If you can, the advisor can help set up systems in the house. And I think that's how you can how you have to manage these vast differences between spouses. It's just, let's make sure we don't argue about certain things.
Hmm.
But I will say that, in the moment, let's say there was such a meeting between a mismatched couple and an advisor, I think the tightwad has the advantage in that kind of meeting. But over time, the spendthrifts tend to win
Hmm.
because the spendthrift just needs kind of this one moment for the tightwad to say, "Okay, fine, get the thing." But the tightwad can say no, no, no all they want. They're just kind of delaying the inevitable that the spendthrift will eventually find their moment. Um, yeah, it's kind of this imbalance because once the money is spent, it's spent, especially if it's on an experience, a vacation or something, or a hard to back out of contract. So the spendthrifts have a kind of built-in advantage there. Tightwads win a lot of battles, but spendthrifts win the war.
Yeah, that when I was reading your book, that stuck out to me as like the spendthrift's behavior is much more final or irreversible, whereas the tightwad, if the tightwad is miserly, the spendthrift can always spend more. But if the spendthrift is spending all the money, the tightwad can't get it back. They can't. Yeah,
It's built-in asymmetry.
yeah, super interesting.
So what can spendthrifts do to tighten up their spending?
Yeah, so for them, it's about increasing the salience of payments and money leaving their possession. So, for example, when I was in grad school, I money was tight, and I kind of trained myself to be a temporary tightwad. I would just pay in cash as much as I could. If I was using a card, I would use debit and I would get the receipt and I would take it home and enter it into my Excel file and feel pain when I would uh, watch my account balance go down. And with cash, I would train myself to feel pain at the ATM when the balance was deducted and feel pain when spending at the store. So just putting up all these like stop signs and reflection points, creating all these kind of psychological speed bumps to spending. And, it's not a recipe for a happy life. It was just a recipe for survival, just to kind of get through this kind of hard time. But that is kind of the general lesson that you have to find ways to put these speed bumps into your spending life. So you go to Amazon and you delete your credit card information and so you have to kind of re-enter it and it just gives you this moment to slow down and reflect like, do I really want this right now? Do I want to get up and get my wallet? Not that I as a spendthrift need my wallet. I have all my cards memorized, um but no, you want to just find ways to put some speed bumps in there.
What are the risks or downsides of trying to moderate spending behavior using some of the tools that you just mentioned?
Yeah. Well, so sometimes, you know, and there are risks for both tightwads and spendthrifts here. It's sometimes we pre-commit to things that we think will be good for us in the future, and then we just can't follow through with it. So, some people pre-commit to exercising by buying a annual gym membership, and then they don't end up using it. And there are some regrets that can come with pre-committing to kind of overly ambitious goals, whether that goal is to spend more or spend less. So, it takes some trial and error when we're thinking about kind of how far to jump in and what we can pre-commit to. But it's worth trying. It's worth experimenting with.
How common is it for tightwads and spendthrifts to end up together in a relationship?
Well, it's certainly more common for the opposites to attract than for tightwads to marry tightwads or spendthrifts to marry spendthrifts. And this is unusual. This is usually we go out and we marry ourselves. So people who are politically conservative tend to marry people who are politically conservative and vice versa. We usually marry ourselves. But if there's something we don't like about ourselves and we see someone else displaying that disliked attribute, it can really shine an uncomfortable spotlight on our own problem. It's like, ugh, is that what I'm like? And so that can be a real turnoff. And so I think at first, encountering someone who takes a totally different approach to money can be kind of charming, interesting, fun, like a kind of a playful conversation topic. So I think it's kind of fun at first. And for a little while, it's fun. Maybe not for a long while, but for a little while.
That insight from the book was like mind blowing.
Thank you. Yes, there are these fatal attractions in life. These, if I might be shy and then I go for the extroverts and it's like so exciting at first, but I am shy. And so over time, I might get tired of hosting parties and, all these social obligations I'm being thrust into. And so it might wear on me. So yes, there are things that are exciting at first that get less exciting over time.
And sorry, when you look at the data, is it like how much more common is it for the mismatched couples to occur?
Oh, good question. I want to say if you look at mismatched versus matched, it's around like 57% versus 43, something like that.
Okay.
So it's not a huge difference. And I mean, there are lots of reasons we get married, but it's kind of consistently there. It's this modest
Okay.
effect, but we always see it.
Yeah, interesting. And how do mismatched profiles affect marital satisfaction?
Not good.
Huh.
Yeah, so we find like the more spouses differ on this dimension, the more they fight over money, the more they report marital dissatisfaction. It can be a volatile thing, and there's lots of irritation to go around. The tightwads do tend to be more irritated with the spendthrifts than vice versa. Again, I think because the spendthrifts have this advantage that once the money is spent, it's spent. So the spendthrift can go out and solve the problem. Well, if you're not going to buy it, I'm going to buy it. So yeah, it's without kind of careful managing of these differences, it can really be not good.
So are matched couples happier than mismatched couples?
They are, and that part is kind of a standard psychological finding that the more similar spouses are, the happier they are, and we certainly find that too. Even kind of two spendthrifts who might be in some financial peril are they might be happier than a tightwad and a spendthrift who are fighting all the time about money. And so, yes, those differences can be very draining on a marriage.
Which couple type was the happiest couple in the samples that you looked at?
Well, the single happiest couple had a gigantic difference in
Huh.
their tightwad spendthrift score. And I do think, I don't want to read too much into a single data point, but it does remind us that you can have a very happy relationship even with these vast differences.
Hmm.
I can add a second data point. I'm married to a tightwad. It can be done, but it must be managed mindfully, intentionally,
Huh.
carefully.
And how do the financial situations of matched and mismatched couples tend to compare?
Yeah, no, I mean, the more spendthrifts you have in the house, the more debt you'll have, the less savings. It's kind of a linear thing. The more spendthriftiness you add to the home. And so there are um, matched couples, matched spendthrifts who don't look good on paper, but are happier than mismatched couples that look better on paper, but are
Wow.
fighting all the time. Of course, if you have two spendthrifts married, that is a recipe for that's a high risk situation and it can go wrong. But let's say they have good income. Like you can be two spendthrifts and not be in danger and just be living a fun kind of um, you know, a fun kind of glitzy life, but it can be done, but it is a dangerous thing.
But do two tightwads together tend to be happy?
Well, that's a great question. They look good. They look happy. They certainly financially are doing well. Um, they're happy in the way that happiness is often measured on these scales. And these scales, these measures, often give a lot of weight, a lot of scoring, high scoring to like a calm, conflict-free life.
Hmm.
Um, but and if you're someone who needs like adventure to be happy, that would not show up on these kind of measures. These measures really are very conservative and kind of, I don't want to say puritanical, but kind of, if you were and your partner just kind of eat TV dinners every night on the couch, it would say like, "Oh, you're doing great." So they're happy on those measures, but I think they're missing out on a lot of fun.
Huh. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. It's like the Cantrell ladder doesn't measure, I don't know, being spontaneous.
Yeah.
Hmm. So, given all that, how important do you think it is for couples to understand each other's spending tendencies?
Yeah. I think it's useful. I think it's useful as like a conversation starter, but it's also useful just to kind of know where they're coming from, that they might have developed some strange patterns based on how they grew up and they have a hard time shaking it. And okay, you got me this awful gift. And I might see that awful gift and think, wow, you don't love me or you don't understand me. And it could be that, but it could also be that you spend money in a very different way.
Hmm.
And you either just, you couldn't bring yourself to buy me something good, or you're just someone who throws money at problems and you overspent and you got something that doesn't really match my interests. Like I would never carry that around or want that kind of thing. So it helps to see like, oh, okay, I can see why you did that. It's not love,
Man,
it's just like a quirk of yours.
yeah. We're gonna ask more about gift giving later, but that was something that like I don't do gifts like for anybody at all ever, and I don't know. Your book made me rethink that, but
Wow.
I want to ask though. Do you think should people be bringing out the tightwad spendthrift scale questions on the maybe second date?
It's interesting. That's interesting. I mean, only if it's like for funsies.
Right,
I wouldn't use it as like a screener. And
right.
like if they get too high or low a score, you say, okay, I'm gonna see my way out now. But um, no, I mean the scale is one way to get a sense of this. But once you know about these tendencies, you can kind of see it. Like, oh, if they're spelling out their reasoning about something, you can say, okay, well, that's a hint of one type or the other.
Hmm.
And it's worth keeping in mind. And one thing I say is like if there's something that irritates you during the dating period, and and you're kind of like, I don't know, just know that it's not going to get better in marriage.
Mm.
Hmm.
It's not going to go away. It's going to kind of accumulate, and that irritation will grow. So think about, can I live with this and even more of this during the
But
dating?
was there data in the book on credit score disparity and relationship duration?
Yeah. So disparity is a predictor of marriages ending,
Huh.
which is kind of supportive of like this idea that when they are different, they're fighting and it's hard. The sum is also a predictor of it ending. So, or, if we both have really low scores, that's bad too,
Uh,
because we're struggling.
Mm.
huh.
So, that speaks to like, oh, there's this danger of like the two spendthrifts. That's bad, or it can be bad. And if we have this difference, we're fighting about it, and that's bad too.
Hmm.
I want to shift to one of the most frequent questions I've had in over 30 years of meeting clients, and it has to do with bank account structures. So, what effect does the structure of the bank account have on the way that money flows through a relationship?
Yes, it has a big effect. Bank accounts have a big effect. And I think it's often an afterthought, and there's a lot of status quo bias. And, people are coming into the marriage and they're not thinking carefully about how these things are set up, but it can be so important. And so, we've done a study where we took newlyweds and we had them, they had separate accounts, and we told them to either keep it that way or put their money into a joint account or do whatever they want. And we followed them for 2 years. We kept checking in with them. Are you happy? Are you talking with each other? Do you still like each other? And the couples who we prompted to go for it, to go for the joint account, were happiest at the end of 2 years. The other couples in the other conditions, you got this normal kind of decline in satisfaction, which is sadly pretty standard. Your happiest day tends to be your wedding day, and then there's
Hmm.
a bit of a dip. But we think the joint account is good. It turns your money and my money into our money. I think all incoming money should be laundered through a joint account. Psychological money laundering, I think that's good. I think
Hmm.
it helps to take away attention from any differences in our income. I don't, those discrepancies can really be hard to cope with for a couple. And so I say this is advice for couples where things are generally going well. If things are on the rocks, I would not say go all in on a joint account, but you want to erase those differences in income and just kind of put those in the background. It's all our money.
Hmm.
Now, and I'm sure we'll get to this, but I don't think only joint is best, but I do think having a joint account that can launder all incoming money is a good thing.
Now, how does your view, or maybe the academic view more generally, on bank account structure differ from popular personal finance advice?
Yeah. Well, it's kind of all over the place, and it's certainly not informed by any science I've heard of or can recognize. Um, but some people, some very conservative people kind of recommend the joint accounts. And I was quite surprised when we had this paper come out on joint versus separate accounts. It was very popular among kind of politically conservative people. And um, I don't know that they would love my follow-up advice, which is you should have separate accounts on the back end of that joint accounts. But um, no, it's yeah, if you're just kind of thinking about what should I do and you're just kind of searching the internet for advice, you're not going to get a clear signal.
And how does bank account structure affect household spending?
Yeah, so it's you know, if you have someone looking over your shoulder, you spend differently. And so if everything's if it's only joint, it can discipline people, and that can be a self-control device. So we spend differently when we're being watched. It's like at Whole Foods when you at the pizza counter, you used to have to ask for pizza, and people would ask for one slice. And then they made it self-serve and they started taking two slices. So when we're not being closely monitored, we can kind of loosen up.
Hmm.
And so um, if if you're in a crunch and you really need to reel in spending, having everything out in the open is one way to do that.
Can you talk about the behaviors that get classified as financial infidelity?
Yeah. From my view, pretty much everything. I mean, uh, yeah, so there's been a lot of stories over recent years about this kind of plague of financial infidelity within marriage and kind of this moral panic around it. And, um, some of it seems quite innocent to me. Like I go to the store, I buy groceries, I use a debit card. Let's say it's $100 in groceries. I take out $20 in cash on top of that. I don't tell you that. If you happen to see the statement, the bank statement, you'll see, oh, Scott spent $120 on groceries. But what you don't know is I had that $20 and I can do whatever I want with it.
Mhm.
I had a little secret spending spree. That to me seems unnecessarily harsh, that kind of definition. And other definitions are like, well, you don't tell your spouse how much you're spending on like a gift for your mom. Um, I can confidently say my wife doesn't care how much I spend on a gift for my mom, just as long as I get the gift. Um, so yeah, it's a really high standard that a lot of people have. Like they want complete, proactive, 100% transparency about what is being spent.
Mm.
Anything short of that high standard is called financial infidelity, which is a very tawdry term, infidelity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a little too much.
Do you have a sense of how big a problem this is?
Yeah. I mean, again, if you look at kind of surveys that have been done, you'll see like these huge percentages of people who engage in this. But again, once you look at like what do you mean by financial infidelity? It's kind of harmless stuff. So
Hmm.
there are some true secretive spending activities that are super damaging. Like you have a secret gambling habit or a drug habit,
Hmm.
that can happen and that can be devastating. But I think the data suggests that the most devastating purchases are those that are right out in the open. The mortgage that we can't afford, the Um,
Hmm.
car, we buy more car than we need, that kind of thing. So I quit to pursue a passion project. Um, it's, if a family's going to spend themselves into trouble, it's usually spending that's right out in the open.
You mentioned total financial transparency. What are the downsides of having that?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of downsides. The problem is you're going to get into unnecessary arguments over little things, that little purchases that if they weren't made wouldn't have mattered anyway. The money, you're not going to become rich by not buying yourself a treat, a latte, a muffin at work. But some people have been convinced that that is what's standing between you and being rich.
Hmm.
The small indulgences of everyday life, the latte, the muffin.
Right.
So people are convinced of that. And if they see you spending on that, they're saying, "Oh my gosh, we could have saved that. We could have invested it." Um, and they're going to pick on you for it. And it might just be something you need for your mental health. I might need to get out of the office and go to Starbucks and get away from people for a little bit. Like, it's important to me. Um, it's not an indulgence. It's like a necessity. So there's that. There's also the reality that we have different interests and hobbies, and I might not understand your passion. And if I went line by line on what you're spending on your interests, it's going to seem like, oh my God, what this it's so expensive. My wife is a needle pointer. I have a guess. I had a guess on what thread cost, and I happened to stumble across something that had a price tag on it, and I had to update my thinking. It was quite shocking, but it's important to her, and that's what is considered kind of good and necessary material in her world. And so I don't, she's not spinning us into the ground on that stuff. And so I don't need to know the details. Um, so it's good to have a general sense of what everyone's doing. Like, oh, you're spending X per month, but the line by line stuff I think that can get you into bad territory.
So is that why you suggested earlier having individual accounts behind the joint account?
Yes,
So
exactly. So
you know the big amount that's going there, but the details end up not phasing you.
exactly. So the details are available upon request, and hopefully the requests are few and far between. They're not
Right.
kind of proactively offered. And so that's what we do. We launder all incoming money through the joint, and then we each kind of move money from joint into our own separate accounts. And that's all we need to know. Now, certainly, if you want a second pair of eyes on your spending or your bank statement, you should feel free to ask. But I'm not kind of proactively kind of combing through what you're up to.
Gotcha.
That's interesting. So there's a joint account that everything gets laundered through, and then there are separate individual accounts where everyone agrees on the amount that goes in there, but what happens with that money is no questions asked.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we each get to spend some of our money without close monitoring.
Yeah.
And so it's important to make it feel like ours. It's still ours, but you need some privacy, you need some individuality, even within a close relationship.
Yeah, totally. So super relatable. Also, lots of confirmation bias for me because that's how my wife and I do it. But
Good.
love to hear it. How do you square though the importance of joint bank accounts, which we talked about earlier, with what we're talking about now, which is having that individual account? Like how do we square that circle?
Yeah. No, I mean it's the key thing is the laundering part. It's kind of erasing the earmarks on money. It's all ours. So you want the marriage to be communal, where you're not scorekeeping. Um, you're not kind of keeping close track of who's bringing in what, and you want to say, "Can you wash the dishes tonight because I'm feeling tired?" You don't want to say, "Can you wash the dishes tonight? I did it last night." You want to Scorekeeping can be very bad for the relationship, and the joint account does seem to help with reducing scorekeeping, keeping it communal. Relationships start communal and they slide into scorekeeping. You want to keep it communal. So the joint account helps with that. And then you can use the separate to avoid these unnecessary disputes at the back end. And so it's using account structure to kind of get all the benefits that you can out of a good, healthy relationship. Communal nature, but avoiding the unnecessary fighting.
Okay, let's shift to the topic of gifts. What role do you think gift giving should play in relationships?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, for a lot of us, Ben seems immune, but for a lot of us, it's kind of this mandatory, unavoidable thing. Like, it's not clear that if we had it all to do over again, we would have put Valentine's like 6 weeks after Christmas and, Father's Day, like, I don't know, but they're there and they're hard to avoid. And so we need to figure out how to deal with them. And, they're really, I suggest kind of turning them into opportunities to kind of express what we understand about our partners, kind of make them feel seen and appreciated and loved. Because a lot of us walk around, if we're in a good relationship, we admire our partners, but we don't say that. We don't tell them why. Maybe we can't find the time to do it. You might say, "Oh, honey, I love you because this and that." And your partner might say, "Okay, well, that's good. Can we figure out how the kids are getting to soccer tomorrow?" Like, there's not like a good time to bring that up. So we have this appreciation that we don't often express. And so the gift giving moments are those chances to say you are seen and appreciated, and we need to feel that. And so they're really important.
Yeah, I don't know. My immunity is like I don't like. It's not that I never do anything nice, but I don't like having to do it on a specific day. Why does someone get to dictate that it's Valentine's Day? Therefore, I have to do something nice for my wife. I'll get her I don't know, a pastry from the bakery because she loves that on a random day for no reason.
Well, I like a random day. I'm all for random days. I say that you should, like, there are these apps where you can say, prompt me like 6 times a year randomly to say, would today be a good day for a gift? And you can, swipe it away if it's not a good day, but it's good. You need surprises. You need those moments.
Yeah, I like that advice from the book, the random suggestion thing. But I also think that your point about, and this is how I interpret it, at least, so you can tell me if I misinterpreted, but it's like it becomes a form of communication. Gift giving becomes a form of communication.
Yes. You might think, oh, I communicate all the time with my spouse, of course, but we're often communicating about, logistical things, and we're not
Yeah, yeah.
getting kind of deep into, I understand your inner psychological life. Like, it's hard to kind of get to that. And so the gifts are like a real important substitute for those moments that we don't delve into in everyday life.
Which is a really interesting framing to think about this next question, which is how useful is it to ask your partner what they want as a gift?
I certainly understand the temptation to do that. I have done that in the past. And, it's a way to avoid disaster. So, I mean, it's not the worst idea. It's better than not getting a gift at all. At least if they were expecting something. But no, it just robs you of the opportunity to display what it is you understand about your partner. And so it shows that you're willing to kind of please them, but it doesn't show that you love and understand them. It just shows that, like, okay, I'm doing what I need to kind of put this fire out and let's move on. So yeah, I don't like that approach at all. And just asking, it's not like it's so easy to just ask. Like, you can ask in a way that really kind of depresses your partner and like makes them think you don't care about them. It's like, oh God, okay, your birthday's coming up. I don't know, you didn't like what I got you last time. Could you just tell me what you want? It's not very romantic. Or if you call up your partner like from CVS, like, oh yeah, Valentine's is tomorrow. Do you want some crap here? But it's um yeah, so the asking itself can be a real problem.
So, what can we do to improve our gift giving skills?
Yes. Well, we it takes time, it takes curiosity, it takes you got to learn more about your partner, kind of what makes them tick, what they're anxious about, what they're excited about, what are their kind of hopes and dreams and plans and goals. And there are questions you can ask each other. We can borrow them from psychology. They're called the 36 questions that lead to love. They're often used to get strangers to feel really close and intimate with each other quickly. But, things like, oh, if you could have anyone over for dinner, who would it be? It starts off kind of light and it gets kind of deeper over the course of the questions, but it can also be used within couples, people who have been together for a long time, where the answers to these questions are totally non-obvious. If you're just going about your days talking about kind of logistical matters, who's going to let the repair person in, like these questions can help and they can really spark ideas for like wonderful gifts.
Hmm. Okay, so we've talked a lot about romantic relationships. How do kids learn about money from their parents?
Yeah. So, they're learning by watching what we do, and they're learning from our kind of active verbal advice. Like, oh, hold on to that gift money from grandma. You don't need to spend it that quick. We don't need to run out to Target and spend it right away. And then I might say that to my kid and say, hold on, let me just order the new iPhone here. And so they'll see these mixed messages. Um, and as a tightwad or a spendthrift, you don't love that aspect of yourself. So you're often telling your kid, basically, do as I say, not as I do. You don't have to be like me. And we see evidence of that the extreme parents kind of give their kids advice to kind of go towards the middle. But also, what the evidence seems to suggest is that over time, we kind of become our parents. We kind of pick up more on what they actually do than what they say in terms of advice. And so, yeah, it's if they see you being like a total spendthrift every day and you just keep telling them, save your money, it's not going to work. It's just kind of tell them that
Hmm.
they're eventually going to pick up on what you're doing. Now, they can't immediately pick up on everything. They can't, buy an unaffordable house as a 7-year-old. But when they encounter these moments later in life, they tend to mimic what they saw earlier on. And so eventually we kind of do look more like our parents than we might hope sometime.
Hmm.
But what if your parents are mismatched?
Yeah. It's they both matter. It's kind of who are you around when or who's kind of doing the big decisions around you. It's kind of who you're more exposed to. So I don't know kind of who would win out. It's just kind of case by case. Um, if you're if dad's working all the time and mom's spending more time with you, it's like, well, what is mom? It's even if mom and dad are mismatched, I would look more at who they're spending the most time with.
Interesting. And what if there's disagreements? How should parents navigate that?
Yes, yes. Well, assuming we're not, assuming there are budgets and realities and trade-offs that need to be made. Um, my advice is that when there's disagreements about kind of material goods, so should we get the new video game system or the new or like the best bicycle versus like a medium bicycle? When parents disagree about that kind of stuff, I say let the tightwad usually win. Defer to the tightwad. And that's just based on research about kind of what makes us happy, kind of material things versus experiences. Um, and so the material stuff tends to, our enjoyment goes down pretty quickly. So I say, let the tightwad win on the material decisions, but on the experiential stuff, should we take this vacation? Should we do certain things on the vacation? Um, should we go on this adventure? I say on those, let the spendthrift win. Because those are really important. Like good vacations, they matter for a family, and they matter in the moment, they matter for the anticipation of it and the stories you tell for years afterwards. They really do matter. So on those types of things, I say maybe let the spendthrift be in charge.
Really interesting. Now, what if there's a difference in what a parent would have decided versus what a child decided to do with their money? If there's a difference in generational decisions.
Yeah. No, I mean, we need more research on kind of the generational component. We need to follow people longer, but um, no, I mean, the in our study where we brought in parents and kids and we had them talk about spending, it was really interesting. Like the kids were much more pro saving than the parents.
Hmm.
Um, like these kids were very conservative. I mean, maybe it's because they were in a lab and we had a video camera on them, but you saw a lot of the parents saying, "No, I mean, you can buy yourself a treat sometime." Um, and what's funny is the parents who were saying that tended to be more on the tightwad end of things. I think because they saw like, oh, I don't want you to maybe turn out like me, so you can loosen up a little, kid. Um, but again, the parent also knew there was a camera on them, and so in everyday life, the kid is going to see the parent kind of saying,
Mhm.
"No, I can't do that."
Hmm. I love the advice on navigating disagreements and separating it between material and experiential purchasing. That's because it's pretty fundamental. Where like if a person thinks it's important to do to have experiences as a family, we talked about this earlier about how someone might rank high on the Cantrell ladder but not be doing fun stuff. It's a really nice way to solve that issue and settling those disagreements.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's I think it can work out. Um, that in our world, like there is disagreement about what's material versus experiential, like a bicycle. Like, what
Mm.
is that? Because it's meant for experiences. So there is some ambiguity, but I do think in general that can be a good guideline.
Yeah, I bought an expensive bike. It was really expensive. I use it a lot, but it was I don't know. But I'm really tall, so I can't just go and buy an inexpensive bike even if I wanted to.
Yeah, right.
That's my excuse.
That works.
My wife agreed too, so that's what mattered, I guess. Uh, so based on all the research that you've done and the research that you did for this book, do you think people should marry for love or should they marry for money?
Yeah. This was one of the things I was shocked by when I was curious kind of what's the advice that's out there. And the digging around I did, I saw way more people recommending marry for money than marry for love. And I wondered, like, maybe the people who believe you should marry for love are like out actually having a good time and having fun. They're not like writing these mean posts, but um, you know, it's F. Scott Fitzgerald, Great Gatsby. He had this advice. He said, "Don't." Um, he said, you want to go to where the money is, and then marry for love. So, um, it's not the worst idea. He's kind of acknowledging, you know, both money and love matter, but it's not so easy to like go where the money is. Um, we tend to hang out with people with similar socioeconomic characteristics. They're not throwing open their mansion doors and saying, "Hey, come on in, have some, have some." And even if you do meet someone with money, are they like super eager to share it with you and see it as our
Mm.
money? Or could there are people who live in apparent luxury, but they feel poor because there are these strict guidelines between this is mine and this is yours. And
Mm.
maybe you get an allowance or something. And um, so it's just not practical, this marry for money advice. Um, and of course, you need love. You need both kinds of love. You need kind of the passionate, burning love of an early relationship. And you also need kind of the companionate love, like, hey, I enjoy hanging out with you and watching Rocky 4. Let's just, have fun doing that. I was watching that with the kids last night, so that's top of mind. Um, but I think you need both and something else. So you need love, you need money, enough money to, you know, be comfortable enough, but you also need kind of psychological similarity. You need kind of similar values, goals, plans, interests, not identical. That would be boring. You don't want to marry a clone, but you need these similar tastes. There's this story, this couple, they were in love, but he wanted to go on a farm and raise 10 kids in a very religious way, and she was like a city dweller, and she wanted maybe one kid, maybe no kids, and wasn't very religious, and they were in love, but they knew that it it just wasn't enough. They had the love and the money, but it was just going to be a disaster. And so they went their separate ways, and they lived their happy lives on the farm and in the city. And um, so so my advice is, like, you go where the similarities are,
Hmm.
and then you marry for love and money. It's a high bar I'm proposing here for marriage. And when you're dating, I say, my goodness, just explore, see what's out there. But for actual marriage, you gotta meet a lot of criteria.
Hmm.
What do you hope people will take away from your book?
Yeah. Well, I certainly, I hope they'll be better gift givers, and I hope they will be more mindful if they have kids about what they display around their kids. Um, and I hope there are bank account structures that changes to those structures that people make and benefit from. I don't expect readers to follow every bit of advice. I think that's fine, but I do think reading through my kind of perspective and the logic of it all will be a useful exercise. Um, just kind of considering this perspective, which again is, I think, very unusual in this personal finance self-help space. It tends to be very puritanical, and it's about how to get rich. And I'm not saying it's bad to get rich, but that is not what my book is about. Like, I can't tell you what to invest in, what fund, like that. There are other people who are good at that, but mine is about kind of routes to happiness via money changes.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's a great book for people to read, and anybody that, I mean, anybody really, because everyone will have a relationship of some sort at some point where money is a medium that will affect joint decisions.
Certainly. Like, a group of friends wants to take a vacation, but we all make different amounts of money. And yes, this looms large in like all interpersonal settings.
Yeah. How did writing this book change your personal approach or perspective on spending?
Yeah. Um, well, it probably made me even more of a spendthrift.
Oh
Um,
wow.
Wow, really?
yeah. I mean, it's because, I talk a lot about when do we get to eat, drink, and be merry, and what do people regret later in life. And um you know I see my kids growing up way too fast, and it's all these thoughts really kind of tilted me even more towards kind of going for it a little bit, in terms of, like, if there's an opportunity for fun but it's expensive, like, go for it, rather than saying, well, let's save it and hope something better comes along later.
Hmm.
um Part of that is, just kind of the world we find ourselves in, and there's uncertainty about the future and worries about what that'll look like. And um, so yeah, it made me lean even more on, like, seizing the moment. Now, I'm not going all in. I still have these automatic payments going to like saving, retirement, and like kids' college, and that's all in the background. That's happening automatically. So I'm not living like each day's my last, but I'm just erring a little more on the side of trying some more fun things, even if they cost some money.
So does that mean you've like increased your fun budget?
Yeah, I mean, so as a spendthrift, I don't do like real micro categories. Like I think that's really helpful and great for tightwads. Um, but yeah, I don't need like that advanced notice of like, oh, I need to set aside this amount for fun. I can find it in the moment. I mean, I probably should be a little more careful in my own budgeting, but no, it's more of a loose mental accounting that I'm up to. Yeah.
Hey man, I think that's great. I think, but personally, budgeting is the most excruciating exercise I have ever tried to engage in. So I don't do it. I do what it sounds like you do, which is I save the amount that I know I should be saving, and don't stress too much about spending. But I'm probably more of a tightwad, it sounds like, than you are.
Yes, I think so.
But I still hate budgeting.
Well, we can find some common grounds.
Our final question, Scott, and this has been great. How do you define success in your life?
It's a great question. I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, it's just it's a real day-to-day thing for me. It's just kind of, am I happy? Are the people around me happy? Do things seem to be going well? It's hard to know. Um, in psychology departments, there's often this joke of like, oh, you're fine. How am I? And instead of like, oh, how are you doing? It's like you need like this outside view. So yeah, I wish I had a better answer for you. I'm sure you've had guests that have much more insight than I do, but it's I'm still trying to figure that out myself.
I think that's a great answer.
Agree. This has been an incredible conversation, Scott. We're so grateful. Your book, Tightwads and Spendthrifts, Navigating the Money Minefield in Real Relationships, is, I think, a must-read for everyone. And thanks for your time.
Oh my gosh, thank you both so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Scott.